hi everyone, and thank you again for all the esteemed panelists for joining the session today. I really look forward to a really interesting discussion that we have today. I believe my colleague Sanjana might share some slides, and then we can discuss some of the context around the issue before we kind of kick on with our discussion. Next slide, Sanjana. And next slide again. Thanks. So beyond its recreation value, nature provides regulating services to the human population, as we know, which is essential to our long-term health and well-being. We rely on natural systems to control weather, access water, produce food, and many more services, which in totality have been valued at $125 trillion. However, the unsustainable production and consumption of these resources are driving the destruction of natural habitats and the loss of biodiversity. The Living Planet Index shows that an average 68% fall in almost 21,000 wildlife populations between the 1970s and 2016. The loss of biodiversity is not only an environmental issue, but a development, economic, global security, ethical, and moral one. Fundamentally, it's an issue of self-preservation. Our need for food and resources has drastically altered the planet's composition, and we're seeing the effects on the population, climate change, species decline, and pandemics. The COVID-19 pandemic has presented an opportunity for us to reflect on our growth strategies, adopting an inclusive economic, social, and environmental sustainability models for future-proofing of business. This includes what we're here to discuss today, the adoption of responsible production and consumption practices through harnessing technology, building resilient, transparent, and traceable supply chains. And like most things today, we can only do this through the help of technology. So India, as we know, is one of the largest importers and consumers of agricultural commodities and holds a pivotal position in the global soft commodity trade. There's huge potential to influence a transition towards sustainable supply chains from India. Many businesses examine their supply chains for environmental and business risks, and there's a growing movement towards sustainability and deforestation-free supply chains. Companies are working with their suppliers to make and implement responsible sourcing commitments. So the advantages of responsible sourcing are immense. As I mentioned, there's growing consumer awareness of this around where and how companies source their materials, and are emerging as key risk criteria for purchasing decisions. Retailers are obviously a critical interface between manufacturers and consumers, and therefore play a key role in influencing sustainability of supply chains and awareness levels around their customer bases. Leading global retailers understand the critical link between their core business, supply chain, and nature and environment, and have been making responsible sourcing commitments and encouragingly, India is estimated at 450 billion retail industry has been taking cue from global retailers. We know there's still a lot to be done, though, to ensure that supply chains are free of environmental and social concerns, and that raw materials are sourced from deforestation-free and also free of child labour. And again, this is where technology can play its role, and traceability and transparency in mapping tools can help us in managing supply chain transparencies and disclosures. So just briefly, some of the ways that WWF are contributing to this is promoting transparency through their palm oil buyers scorecard, which is a tool that allows companies to disclose the progress that they're making on their commitments to implementation of their supply chain. This scorecard assesses and ranks key manufacturers, retailers, and food services, as well as hospitality companies, on their commitments and actions related to sustainable palm oil. We're about to launch the 2021 version of this scorecard, which will be launched at the end of this month and includes 239 companies. 5 Indian companies have joined for the first time this year, which is really exciting as we broaden the reach across Asia. Spot is also another tool, an online tool, which ranks and assesses commodity traders on the sustainability of their supply chains as well. From a traceability perspective, what traceability allows us to track where raw materials are coming from in the supply chain, and is an essential requirement for companies in ensuring their raw materials are sustainably and ethically sourced. and that companies are meeting the commitments that they have made. So upstream, many upstream buyers are requiring traceability to mill or plantation from their downstream suppliers. And this covers just beyond environmental protection, but there's many benefits of this, which you can kind of read and see on the screen. Traceability is a necessary means to an end, and it's foreseen that supply chain mapping and traceability can help identify supply chain sheds that represent significant sustainability risks and should therefore become a focus of all interventions in the future. WWF will be releasing a report this week where we've used big data to trace palm oil from key WWF production landscapes at risk of deforestation and species extinction. And we've mapped these to major markets, including India. Research like this helps suppliers to detect any links to high deforestation landscapes, and therefore engage their downstream players on how they can implement on-the-ground solutions to prevent this. There are a lot of other tools around as well that help bring traceability and transparency within the supply chain. We're working on the ground in Sumatra, which is this photo here, to implement an application where farmers can log the sale of their fresh fruit bunches, which gives traceability back to the mill. And this is in a high deforestation area. So for suppliers to know that they're not linked to deforestation is really valuable business information in this instance. Trace is another tool that helps with supply chain traceability, and there are many others that are implemented by traders themselves and some private individuals. So that's quite a lot from me. So I want to hand over now to the panelists to get some of their opinions around how we're using technology, transparency and traceability to within sustainable sourcing. And my first question today is for Mr. Manish Pandey. Hi, Manish.
Hi, and good afternoon.
Good afternoon. So my question for you today is, how effective do you think voluntary certifications and private standards are in influencing retailers to move towards environmental and socially responsible supply chains? And how they can ensure that raw materials are sustainably sourced? And then this is quite a long question as well, but if you don't mind answering, how can organizations such as QCI, where you're representing today, how can they influence Indian companies to ensure compliance with these standards?
Okay, right. Philippa, thanks for giving QCI the floor. And let me first congratulate WWF to have this panel discussion. And it is a very opportune time where there is an increased need to place robust systems to ensure responsible businesses as a norm rather than an exception. Now, this also become even more pertinent as different supply node mapping and responsible business principles are needed to be applied uniformly across the value chains. So let me talk about forest and agriculture, because that is would be more topical. Although we have many other schemes as QCI that we do. Now, as Quality Council, we understand that we have
some background noise, I think.
yeah, just
the benefits of working from home.
no, it's actually my office. So
okay.
I was
No
organizing a separate place, but it's okay.
No worries.
So just focusing back onto the topic, I think so as the Quality Council, we have quite a bit of schemes that we run when we talk about traceability, supply chain management, and of course, having best practices in place. As the Quality Council, being a part of the quality infrastructure, as I call it, which actually has a national standards body, which is the Bureau of Indian Standards, and then we are there as the national accreditation body, and we call another of the third pillar is called the National Meteorological Institute, or NMI, which is the National Physical Laboratory based out of Delhi, India. Now, these three work in tandem to ensure that whatever we talk as voluntary standards, private standards, or maybe a regulatory standard, give a right context to the people, both in terms of not only in terms of people who would be using it, also the people who are demanding it, and also the people who are reviewing it. So we have these three elements where we talk about a scheme owner, we talk about somebody who is going to apply that, which would be the entity which would get certified, and of course the third part is the consumer at the base of it. Now, when you talk about the effectiveness of the voluntary certification, and of course private standards influencing companies, so all the credit goes to organizations like WWF and other NGOs and various other pressure groups which talk about certain practices which are prevalent in a certain sector. Now, how it goes to my understanding is that they are the ones who are responsible to create a consumer awareness on the merits and the demerits of the practices which are currently being done. And once the consumer understands the the politics of any supply chain or any practices that are there, then they start to either get into deeper discussions, or then they want their retailers and the upward supply chains to actually have various other instruments to check them. In your presentation, you talked about a lot of tools. Yes, for us, they are the tools which will achieve certain deliverables. But when we talk about systems as that what we profess, we develop such kinds of tool in deep consultations with all the stakeholders. We have a system where we talk about having a multi-stakeholder consultative committee, which actually has three committees, which is a steering committee, a technical committee, and a certification committee. Now, these committees have a very clear-cut TOR of themselves, and we have members or committee members in a manner that add value. So if I talk about a technical committee, the technical committee focuses on how to do it, what to do it, and what are the elements to be put in place. So for example, if we talk about medicinal plants, an easy example, so they will have everything right from the site selection until to the propagation material, to the processing, to the kind of storage practices, and of course coming to the end as the transport practices until it goes to a tertiary processor or to the retail chain. So what is our influence? Our influence is basically guided by certain norms. Either the norms comes from the consumer itself, or it comes from the government, because government, we all understand, is the biggest procurer. So we talk about certain things as what we call as public procurement policies. The public procurement policies have to be influenced in a manner that focuses that this particular activity is something that ensures traceability best practices. And then there would be certain things like tracing of invoices, or tracking the record of a certain organization, or upgrading the auditors that go and checks up compliances in the various parts of that supply chain. Now, this is something that is what the Quality Council does through the schemes. When I talk about the schemes, they are called voluntary schemes. Voluntary schemes because we are not a regulator as what we are structured. We work closely with the stakeholders to see that they understand the requirements. They themselves come out with the issues and the ways to handle it. So it is not that we have the force of the law, because if it is a force of law, there is no discussion. It is only compliance that is required. Now, in certain such cases, the voluntary schemes that QCI runs gives a lot of play to both the entities that get certified, the supply chain players, and of course we get into a lot of updates in our schemes. Maybe usually it is a period of 3 years, but when we launch a scheme, we give ourselves 6 months to dry run the scheme, so that we have things like that. So that was the sort of an reflection about the first part of your question. On the second part, about how organizations such as QCI influence to ensure compliance with these standards and regulations. So there are three ways that we do it. One is that we talk to the regulator. So let us talk about food. So food has a regulator, which is the FSSAI, and we all understand the country is huge, and then there is lot of resources required to do anything. Which while we talk about enforcement of regulation, in that systems, what we submit to the government is that it is better that they start with a voluntary system, where the QCI system talks about engaging private certification bodies, which gives them some kind of a revenue, but actually removes a lot of pressure out of the regulator, because the regulator can't have 10,000, 20,000 people at their command to do, sort of inspections for licensing. It is better that they go towards the voluntary system, where the third party agencies, which also are approved under a process. It is not that we just pick and tell them to work. So there is a detailed process where we have a review of their quality management systems and the human resources that they employ. And once we are satisfied that they have the correct set of practices or systems in place and the correct kind of a human resources, then only we give them the approval. And then on the behalf of the government, they would, or on the behalf of QCI, they would do their due diligence, give a report, to have a auditing system, and then that at times is accepted by the government. So we have a very clear example that I can quote, maybe not in the food and or NRM sector, but in the civil aviation, we actually, as QCI, have been agreed by the government as the first point of contacts for drone licensing. So what we do as QCI is to do the entire due diligence on the behalf of the regulator, so that the regulator gets a report and a certificate of the compliant organization that develop the drones as per the safety, security and other norms as the government has said, and which relieves them a lot of pressure in terms of what do I say, compliances. They only check the final certificate. They do some random checks to see that the processes are as agreed with QCI, and then they move it forward. So organizations like QCI influence both the government and I would say the policy part of it, and also sort of encourage the Indian companies to be going up the value chain through the voluntary system rather than by the force of law, because force of law at times is something which is harsh, non-negotiable. What QCI does in such sectors is that goes as more of a spearheading of inducing or establishing quality, where the government is yet to set standards, because setting standard is a painful system, because there's a lot of research required. And when you see that if there is a standard in place, it takes about 18 to 24 months. Till that time, actually the relevance is lost, because the technology moves so fast, and sometimes some processes and some things are redundant. So this is what quality council does. It talks to the governance or the policy makers. It talks to the Indian or any other company for that matter. And we try to sort of put in the point that it is better to be compliant, forward moving, than wait for a regulation to come and struggle to achieve it. So we give them some good ideas. We have a last example I want to cite is something that we did for medical devices, where while the regulators was used to form a regulation, the Quality Council went ahead and made a scheme on the medical devices. And after 3 years, the regulation came. Just because QCI had done the work 3 years back, the regulators didn't find problems in having notified bodies, as we call them, to go and audit on behalf of the government. The the industry was heads up on the requirements, because already 3 years were spent for them to be compliant, and then it was a win-win situation both for the company, for the government, and as a country as a whole, because somewhere QCI, with its foresight and with the support of their partners, actually gave them a framework which had sufficient time and flexibility for them to adopt it. So this is what we do. It's more of an enabling approach rather than a controlled approach. And of course, one more thing that we do, as I've just told you, the schemes are made on mostly international best practices. We employ ISO 17024 on personal certification. We have something like 17025 on lab accreditations, and some 17065 on product certification, for example, if you talk medicinal, trans food, or anything. That gives a lot of traction to these Indian companies should they want to trade outside, because we work under the accreditation framework. So our certifications as such would be acceptable in something like 120 countries. I think so. I've done my part. Over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Manish. I think that's a really good point, that through conforming to these standards, it does give Indian companies more market access to access markets outside the country. And also, as you mentioned, kind of getting ahead of regulation in terms of adopting voluntary standards. Companies can ensure that they're implementing best practice ahead of some pending policy regulation, which would actually make it much more difficult to kind of catch up as a company, as a business.
Yes, you're right.
So,
very well captured. Thanks.
Yeah. So thanks so much for that. I'll move on to our next panelist. We have Mr. Swaminathan, who is the Chief Supply Chain Officer from ABFRL. So welcome to the panel, Mr. Swaminathan, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Ms. Walker.
So my question for you is, again, another long one. I've got lots of long questions today, but how does the fashion and lifestyle retail industry in India understand the role of implementing responsible sourcing practices within the supply chain? And following, as a kind of follow-on question from that, given that ABFRL is amongst the global sustainability leaders in textile and apparel sector, how are you monitoring your ethically and sustainability within raw material sourcing across your value chain? And how then does traceability kind of fit into that implementation handbook?
Thank you, Ms. Walker. Thanks, Aditya, for having me here. As highlighted by Ms. Walker, ABFRL, Aditya Birla Fashion and Retail, has been a leader in sustainability. This journey dates back to around 10 years when we started this journey of sustainability in the organization. We are currently a large fashion organization in the apparel and retail industry. We have around 8.5 million square feet of retail space. We have over 3,000 stores and over 30,000 multi-brand outlets and over 7,000 large format outlets. This journey has been, I would say, started around 10 years back when we set up. We set clear standards in terms of where we want to be. We set 10 goals in terms of where we want to be in terms of sustainability. We set up 10 large missions for energy conservation, carbon footprint reduction, green building, wash pledge, multiple dimensions, waste reduction, packaging in terms of sustainable packaging, corporate social responsibility, all of these domains, I've not covered all, wash pledge, all of these, we set up clear goals in terms of where we want to be. Initially we started with, the overall journey started with a lot of Excel tracking and, all this journey was being tracked in Excel when we started this. And we moved on to current form where it is tracked at a platform in terms of which I think has been the critical journey for us in terms of sustaining this overall journey towards sustainability. We are all of them are on platforms. The accuracy of data, reliability of data is very critical in measuring our journey effectively. So that has been one of the biggest learnings for us. And in terms of coming to your question, in terms of sustainable sourcing, I would say when you talk about when we measure our sustainable value chain, there are two important aspects we try to cover. One is we want to ensure that whatever we make are being made under fairly safe conditions and conditions where the employees are treated as per the laws and then they work in healthy conditions. That is one aspect of the supply chain. Second aspect of the supply chain which we clearly focus is on manufactured products which create as less impact on the environment as possible. Mm-hmm. These are the two dimensions with which we work on in terms of the overall process. So the way we have been able to maintain this, we developed a policy of in terms of how we will measure our partners, how we will measure ourselves, and then we created a format in terms of how will we measure our journey.
Yeah.
We can be, for example, we would say what is the code of conduct, and how we will evaluate the journey in terms of code of conduct of the vendors. What is we then from code of conduct we evolved to supplier sustainability assessments, which covers just not the social aspect, the quality, the sustainable practices, the chemical management processes all put together. We started measuring our supply chain in all these parameters. We actually, as we speak, we were around 100 of our top vendors have been completely assessed, and we have said we have identified areas of improvement, and we are moving in terms of rolling out this to more number of vendors. We have started with critical vendors and moving it to the subsequent levels in terms of measurement of this. The most important aspect I would say is measurement is extremely critical in making progress in this journey. And we have been focusing on that on a continuous basis. When we talk of the vendor collaboration, we talk of the we give the vendor the green channel certification, where we rely on their assessments in terms of quality. We continuously work with them in upgrading their skills and the technology which they deploy. We assess their in terms of social code of conduct. We assess them. Then in terms of the we assess in terms of what are the sustainable practices they have.
Yeah.
Are they having do they have say, for example, they have a zero liquid discharge, they have proper chemical management processes, do they have green building certifications? These things are assessed, and we rate them on our vendors in terms of platinum, gold, like that. We rate them, and then we recognize them also in terms of how they are doing in this journey.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what was your second part of the question?
It was around how traceability fits into that.
Yeah, I see.
In terms of the challenges of tracing back to source, because I can imagine there's quite a lot of cotton going in, there's chemicals, there's things like that. And having heard of what a large enterprise you are, it must be coming from all parts of the world. So how does traceability fit into that equation?
See, actually, we were the first company to do a blockchain-based pilot in terms of traceability.
Yeah.
And we have basically we need to deploy technology to have traceability at scale.
Yeah.
And that is where we are moving. Our direction is to deploy technology in being able to do this. Otherwise, the processes. We can drive traceability at small scales. At large scale, we are driving a pilot in terms of how we can deploy technology to drive traceability. And it is extreme in terms of in our opinion, it is extremely critical to the reasons why we want to drive this is we believe customers will more and more ask for more sustainable products. The direction of change is going to be driven by customers. Though the consumers currently do not pay premium in terms of more sustainable products, it is not yet there. It is more of considered a hygiene practice. But in times to come, I believe the younger generations would pay probably a premium and drive organizations to more sustainable practices, which will need traceability of the supply chain.
Yes,
and it is extremely critical. And for us, we are preparing ourselves to be ready for that. And other challenge I would say is the adoption of technology. One is in India and also in textile industry across the globe. A large part of manufacturing happens in small-scale organizations. Yeah. It is important to drive the awareness understanding of importance. That is where large retailers and large organizations can play a role in developing the ecosystem to move in this direction. Because because consumers are moving there, we need to move there, and the large organizations have to drive sustainability practices in their supply chain, and that will be extremely critical for both. Not just for survival, it is part of our business strategy, if I can say so.
Thanks, Swaminath. And I think that's a really important point that you've made about it being a long journey that, as you say, you started 10 years ago and you're anticipating consumer demand for this. And I think in terms of spelling out the journey of first setting goals and then actually figuring out how do you monitor against those goals. And I mean, my understanding is that that's not easy, particularly amongst the supply chain that you work with, and through starting with a small number of suppliers, helping and building capacity with those suppliers, seems that you've kind of been able to make some really significant progress with that. And I would love to hear another day more about the blockchain trial that you're conducting with traceability as we look to do that across different supply chains. And I mean, I can say from experience, it's not easy work, but it is indeed really important. So I am getting prodded about managing time here, but I think we could discuss these topics a lot more. I think I will move on to our next panelist, and I want to introduce Mr. G.R. Srikkanth, who's the Senior Vice President of Spencer's Retail. And I want to ask today, how important is it for retailers to promote responsible sourcing practices in their supply chains to achieve environmental and human rights goals, which is, I mean, what we've already been speaking about today so far, but it would be interesting to hear Spencer's perspective. And also how Spencer's Retail, what commitments you have on responsible sourcing within your supply chains, and how you're working with your suppliers in the same way that ABFRL are, how you're working with them to implement these commitments. So thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks Philippa, and good evening everyone. Philippa, I can't agree more than what my predecessor speakers have spoken. I fully echo with what Mr. Manish and Mr. Swaminathan is saying. But having said that, I speak from my perspective from the retail of Spencer's. So as we know that retailers, we act as an intermediary between the producers and consumers.
Yeah.
We are in the position that we can have the most promising influence in the society in safeguarding the natural resources. There are different ways where retailers can influence with the help of more sustainable, by creating a more sustainable development. When we talk about sustainability, more oftenly we associate with some kind of CSR, a corporate social responsibility, or we assign this with meeting recycling or global warming and saving forests, etc., etc. But when we talk about in retail, this is much more than what we have just limited to a certain part of it. It is the ability of the retailer who can create an environment without compromising future generation needs. So as a retailer, what we fully involves in responsible sourcing is, number one, you know, the business, we have many partners. We have international vendors and national vendors and local vendors. As Mr. Swaminathan said, majority of the vendors fall in medium, small, micro enterprises.
Yeah.
So, large organizations, they have the setup, they have the capacity, they have the bandwidth to take all necessary action in sourcing or in ensuring the compliances or sustainability. But the problem comes with the large chunk of your customer in the sense your vendors, who require certain kind of a training. They are not equipped. Here, as a retailer, our role plays a very significant importance. So, as Mr. Swaminathan said, we do have certain kind of exercise, a due diligence process is onboarding the vendors. There are certain aspects which are non-negotiable. Like Mr. Manish has also said, when law is law, you have to just comply, yes or no, that's it.
Yeah.
No negotiation. So there are other areas where it can good to have, but it's better. These are optional things. So our role comes very importantly, as you said, in building a capacity, in enhancing the capacity. So in enhancing the capacity, what as I said, there are certain aspects which are non-negotiable that we simply go ahead. Like suppose ensuring the compliances under the labor law. Of course, no problem. But there are certain aspects which is more than the law. If law says that you pay X dollars, but the vendor is paying X plus 1, so we'll encourage that kind of a thing. In other words, we'll encourage the builder, we'll encourage the vendor who is providing certain kind of dignity of workers and which is much beyond that what is prescribed under the law. So we'll rate because based upon internal mechanism, we'll rate on this.
Yeah.
But having said that, we are in a position to dictate them, but our contracts are very fair, very transparent. The contract we make in free and fair manners. In fact, last month we had a vendors meeting. So we trained our vendors on coming up the new food safety regulations. Coming January 22, we have certain food labeling declarations undergo major changes. So we are equipping our vendors to make aware about the proposed changes. This is one kind of mandatorily. I'm not a duty bound, but under the responsible sourcing, this is my duty that not only me, the entire ecosystem upscale, and enter upstream also, I need to educate and make them aware. In addition to this, what we will do periodically, we'll also circulate them about the latest ecosystem around their products in terms of best practices or in terms of those changes in law or in terms of any new technologies. This is about our practice in ensuring responsible sourcing. Now, coming to the other question is not traceability and meeting those commitments. Like my predecessor speakers, as you also said, traceability provides an opportunity to increase the supply chain efficiencies. In addition to that, it helps also to meet your regulatory requirements.
Yeah.
We found that there is a direct correlation between your supply chain transparency and traceability with reference to your cost, with reference to your efficiency, and with reference to quality. When you talk about supply chain transparency, it refers for the disclosing entire information right from the source to from the origin to end use. But the current technologies, which frankly, there are a lot of hardship in this, but going forward, the blockchain is coming, and frankly, we are not yet implemented, but we are in the process of implementing the blockchain. When this comes, then majority of the problems will be addressed. So currently, what it is mainly focused is responsible sourcing and also to have the transparency and traceability. Traceability, yes, we have a very robust system. In fact, in getting the license also in India, you need to submit your FSMS, food safety management system, especially in case of food, and you also need to submit a recall plan. So under recall plan, then they'll ask, the department will ask, how do you trace the product? What is your mechanism? What is your infrastructure? What is your software? So what is your network? Especially this has happened some time ago. There was a major fiasco of some very top international vendors, food item. They had to recall more than 200 crores for assets of breakfast cereal. They need to recall. So after this, the department has become very stringent in ensuring that it's kind of a mandatory to have a traceability system, especially for the food items.
Yeah.
Non-food, it's a purely optional. So in addition to this, this is one aspect of responsible sourcing and traceability and all. Yeah. As a retailer also, our commitment towards the society and towards the nature is that, and then we are the first retailer who started our generating own power by installing a rooftop solar plants. So we have around 500 kilowatt solar rooftops in our outlets. And we are in the process of setting up some more in-house rooftop solar plants, which we can generate. We're planning to take this capacity to 1 megawatt so that we can drastically reduce the carbon footprint. So our group policy is one of the largest group in India, and our group policy is to reduce the greenhouse gases, and sustainability is one of our core values.
Great, fabulous. Thanks, I mean, thanks so much for sharing that. I think there's some real lessons to be gained there from everyone that we've heard today, is that to implement a sustainable supply chain takes quite a lot of capacity building for our downstream vendors, and especially those who are the SMEs, in terms of helping them reach the standards that are required both by legislation and also by company policies. And I think what I found really interesting is that while things like traceability and transparency are of interest from a sustainability perspective and knowing where our products come from so we can link to environmental concerns, it also helps the bottom line in terms of ensuring quality and in future product recall. So I think I mean, as we see blockchain developing and as we see applications roll out on how it is, I think it will be very soon that we will have full visibility over our supply chain, which should mean healthier foods, more quality foods, and hopefully linking to environmental. We know what the environmental impacts are of what we're consuming. So I will move on to our last panelist today, and thank you very much for waiting. We have Mr. Umashankar Mahapatra, and he's the Senior Vice President of Innovation and Sustainability and the Business Head for Health and Hygiene at Welspun India. Hello and welcome. Thank you. Thank you for joining the panel today. We're very happy to have you. So that given that Welspun in India is a strategic partner with various retailers, do you receive a push from them to meet certain ethical and responsible sourcing practices in India? And how have Welspun India integrated supply chain traceability into your practices? And how are you seeing the role of digital tools in tracking the source of raw materials?
Thank you, Philippa. I hope I am audible.
Yes, very clear, thanks.
Yeah, so first of all, let me congratulate the organizer. They have created a really very diverse panel in this discussion. You are coming from NGO, then we have scientists from Quality Council, and two of our great retailers of the country with multiple brands in their portfolio. And I represent Welspun India Limited, which is the one of the largest home textile producer and exporter globally. And we are a mix. We have manufacturing footprints, which is really very large, and we have our own brands also. So I can talk from an angle of manufacturer and also from a brands perspective. So Welspun is part of Welspun Group. We have some other business also apart from textiles. So we are into large dia steel pipes, which goes into water and oil and gas transportation. And also our group is into large infra projects like road, highways, water projects. And last year we got into the warehousing solution as well. And in each and every business, sustainability is one of the core pillars. So it's not only that we are into textile, which is consumer facing, but our other business, which are primarily into the B2B hardcore industrial space. But every business has got sustainability integrated into their business model. So that's one aspect. And although our the revenue almost, I would say, more than 90% comes from B2B export sales, but brands and retail, especially in domestic market, is very key for us. And our brand called Spaces, which is among top top 2 brands in India in terms of in the premium category of products. So we have presence across more than 2,000 outlets across 350 cities and towns. And also, apart from our own brands, we have, licensed brands in international markets, like say Martha Stewart in North America, then Scott Living in North America. We own a, heritage brand called Christie from Manchester, England for more than a decade. And we are the proud supplier of Wimbledon towel for last, several years. So
you're everywhere.
So every in US market, every 5th towel sold is manufactured by Wellspan. So that's a very large,
wow,
large footprints we have. So coming to the sustainability and the supply chain part of it, for sure our retailers are asking, because that's one of the key criteria. But it's not only for that. I think it's for our own good. Unless we have a very, very sustainable supply chain, which is ethical and traceable, we can't grow, the scale we are operating. So it's not only that our retailers are asking, but it's for our own good. And as Mr. Saminathan and also Mr. Srikkanth told, that so it's coming from the consumers. Consumers are, willing to switch their brands, for ethically sourced products. So you have seen, multiple instances, last couple of months or I think over a year, a lot of, I think, incidents happen globally. So it's a very, very key for us to have, transparency and sustainability. And one of the key material for us is the cotton, because we are a cotton dominated industry. So in home textile, I would say more than 85 to 90% of our raw material is cotton. So one of the, we need to de-risk ourselves is, securing the very, very transparent supply chain of cotton. So we start from, really from the sustainable farming practices. So we are directly connecting with more than 12,000 farmers in India and covering over 100,000 acres of land. And we focus primarily on sustainable cotton farming, mostly BCI. So that's, I would say, our first, step towards sustainability and traceability of cotton. Then second part is, we have a very, very, the use of technology. You mentioned in your, in your question, how technology can help. So more than 5 years ago, we got a, patent granted on the traceability of entire value chain of textile. And we have branded it under the name of WellTrack. So it was a, based on RFID technology, where we can trace the product from a QR code on the finished product. We can go back to the, the bale of cotton being used in the entire process. And it's not only to the bale of cotton, we can even identify which particular machine we have run through that process. So it's in that detail. So it's also from the cotton traceability and also the QC of internal process, because textile is a very long value chain. If you start with the spinning to multiple, thousand looms working. So unless the system and process are really robust, there could be even, chances of mix up within your boundary, within your bit also there could be, something may go wrong. So the traceability has to be that much robust, so that it's not only, you are identifying the transaction certificate of your supply or invoices of your supply, but we need to ensure that each and every machines also we can identify. So that's the second part, I would say, in terms of ensuring the traceability. So first is going back to the, upstream value chain. Second, having adoption of technology so that we can really go back to the finished your, country of origin and also the invoice of the cotton we have used. Then the third very important aspects in, in traceability is that, even we have gone one step further, which is the forensic based traceability. So we are the first one in home textile space, I think, among few in textile to got into the forensic fingerprinting for cotton. And it's quite different from other, fingerprinting solution you have in market, where physical tracers are being put in the product and then you need to trace it throughout the value chain. Here it's not that. So it's a origin based solution where you need not put any physical tracer, but still you can map, from the naturally occurring elements into the cotton. You can map it in the country, the type of soil it's there, you can link. So we have, mapped our cotton coming from, say, Egypt, because in home textile space, Egyptian cotton is one of the very, very high selling products, especially in US market. So Egyptian cotton, Supima cotton, then many, premium cotton like BCI and organic. So that kind of traceability, we have even, enhanced our traceability footprint through origin. So that's the, I would say, the third point. And the fourth point is, the organic demand is going, everywhere. And there are a lot of risks associated. I think if you have followed the Indian, organic news, I think there are a lot of, I think I would say, bad practices happened last year. It came into news that in the name of organic cotton, there are a lot of, forging of documents. It's not really genuine cotton of organic. So that's one of the risks I see associated with the organic cotton supply. So our philosophy always been to ensure that whatever organic cotton we are using, that's the entire country has to be a non-GMO, country, so that there is no risk of, cross-pollination. India especially is having farmers having a very, small farm holding. So even after putting a lot of, best practices, still there are risk of, cross-pollination. So that's, I think, another very, very robust, as a group philosophy we are following, that entire organic cotton purchase has to be, really non-GMO source. So I think that's in terms of overall organic, overall cotton, de-risking part of traceability and sustainability.
Yeah.
Then comes, traceability of the ethical sourcing of sustainable synthetic fiber, because now textile is having a lot of demand for say man-made cellulosic or say recycled polyester. So there are also a lot of ethical, practices, ethical certification process like FSC certification for wood-based product. Then you have the certification like GRS, which gives a lot of traceability, and also it ensures that there is no human rights violation or there is no child labor in the rag picking of the post-consumer bottle. So those kind of certification are also helping. Other very, very key criteria, I would say, which Wellspan has done for the very first time in textile industry is, we are also dependent on although we are very vertically integrated, unlike retailers, they have so much small supplier, but we have, suppliers in case of packaging, we have many, small suppliers, but
Yeah.
cotton or large, dyes and chemical, they are pretty much, large conglomerates, I would say, in terms of a lot of MNCs or, are in that space, but packaging space is really fragmented. So what we have done, we have created a ancillary park, in our Anjar facility, which is almost, one of the largest textile complex in the world, almost 3,000 acres of land we have there. And there we have, co-located all our key, packaging and trim suppliers, so that, we are not at risk of any, compliance failure. And also we are helping them in terms of adopting best practices. So that's one of the very unique thing we have in our supply chain, so that, although our textile value chain is fully integrated under one roof, but our other, small suppliers can also come into our, vicinity, and we can, support them in terms of certification, best practices, infra, support. So that's, one of the unique things.
Right.
Yeah, so that I would say in terms of entire supply chain and traceability part.
No, thanks so much, Mr. Umashankar, for sharing that. I find it really fascinating to hear the different approaches that you're taking within cotton, particularly. And I have seen that approach of QR code scanning being used across different commodities to ensure traceability. And it will be interesting to see how that develops. And the use of forensic traceability is also equally fascinating to trace origins of sources. And I just want to kind of thank you for sharing that today. And we do have a question here from the audience, which I think is interesting to pass back. And it is, what do you see as the cost of transparency and traceability for a business? And I find that interesting because you've talked about cost, but you've also talked about that you're using it for premium products and to ensure that you can justify claims. So I might add to that, what is the cost? And then what is also the benefit that you're seeing out of this? How does it pay for itself?
Yeah, so I would say it comes at a cost. So it's comes with a premium, because there are a lot of technology. So initially, if it is a technology-based solution, then you need to invest on a particular technology, set up the entire ecosystem, so including hardware and software. So there are investment involved. So it's a mix of both soft skill and your infra setup. So not necessarily that everybody needs to invest in a very IT solution, but even with a proper process control or system and process, it can be adopted. But for sure, all these high-tech solution at the initial days, it cost. Yes, brands and retailers are willing to pay certain premium. For the manufacturers, it's difficult to apply it for across the product category. So that's why I mentioned we have so far adopted only for the premium products.
Right.
For certain products, like say, which you are buying from Indian cotton, medium staple cotton, where there is no risk or we are not giving any specific claims, so there is no liability attached to it. So there is no point in adding those very high tech solution and making the products unaffordable. So I would say in the initial days there will be cost, but as you move to a larger scale, maybe your initial investment will be amortized over a larger volume. I think that's when I think Mr. Saminathan told, blockchain, you can test it for a small pilot, but if you want to roll it out for the entire SKUs, because they will have thousands of SKUs and millions of products in the market, so it's really expensive to roll it out at the current maturity of technology. I think the technology will mature in the coming days for large scale adoption.
And I know, Mr. Swaminathan, I'll hand that over to you in terms of cost, because I know that you also mentioned actually traceability has helped you reduce costs within your supply chain and also improve quality. So I wonder if you want to have a go at answering what is the cost. I'm sure no one's going to give me a number today. but you can speak to it, I guess.
Yeah, I think one aspect is clear. It's going to cost more, and at some point of time, consumers willingness to pay for that that is what will sustain this journey. If there is no willingness then of consumers to pay for this, I think economically it would not be sustainable for organizations to drive this change. So I think but what is two things which has happened in the last 2 years is that one is digitization has gone multifold, and sustainable products have also gone multifold. I think people have probably realized COVID is not the last crisis the mankind would face.
Indeed.
Might probably face more crises as we related to water and temperature, and a lot more crises are going to happen. Maybe this generation may not see, the younger generations would see. I think that realization has really moved the younger generations to adopt sustainable products. I hope this is sustained so that this becomes a self-fulfilling in terms of economically self-fulfilling, and then drives this change. And once this direction of change is set, it is very difficult to reverse it in the world. That's what I would feel. Yes. Regarding the cost of adoption, I think there is going to be a cost. At scale, cost can be marginal. Initially, the early movers, the initial part of the initial adopters are going to have probably who can afford it, and probably who have the vision to be able to make it work in the longer term, will adopt it and drive it. That would have an additional cost. I'm not telling a number at this point of time.
No, that's fine. No, I think that's a very good point.
3 to 5%. In my opinion, initially it will be at least 2-3% of cost will be there, which is additional.
No, I really like your point, and I want to get to our final question, but we have 4 minutes left. But I think the point is that to develop this technology is expensive, but once it's there, it doesn't go away. And I think as we see it advance and develop, then that's when we can reach the scale.
At scale, when maybe a couple of decades down the line, it may not even cost more than cost more. Yeah. But that presently it would.
Fabulous. Okay, so we have 3 minutes left. If you can answer in 1 minute, Mr. Srikkanth, then I will ask you this question about how does traceability apply to smaller retailers? It's fine for large retailers like yourself, but what can small retailers do?
Yeah, sure.
You have 1 minute.
See, the large retailer or small retailer, end of the day, it's a management system, what it required. Again, I'll repeat what Mr. Swaminathan said, that once you have the small retailer, a large retailer, once you have the skill, then you can recover easily. Now, coming to a specific question, small retailers can adopt lot of on-the-shelf tools are available. Your warehouse management system, or your shipping tools, your supply chain tools, lot of tools are available off the shelf, and we can subscribe instead of getting a customized software, a customized enterprise management system. They can subscribe to the existing available models, so that once they increase their scale, then they can have their own customized model. Till that time, they can, the lot of in the market, lot of softwares are available. They can buy any of the tool, and they can subscribe any of the tool, and they can utilize it.
Fabulous. No, thank you so much, and thanks for the nice, succinct answer to that. I have really enjoyed the session today in learning about how voluntary implementation of standards and commitments can kind of lead the way ahead of what we see may be pending legislation, or it may be just the right thing to do for future generations. And I want to thank all the distinguished panelists today, and for what your organizations are doing, as you say, in kind of leading the way for the industry in developing a lot of these approaches and tools and technology, such that we can have greater transparency and traceability along our supply chain. And I'm sure many other businesses will benefit from your work in the future, and it will all contribute towards greater sustainability within their supply chain. So a big thanks again for joining the panel today, and a big congratulations for all the work that has been done to date.
Thank you.
Thanks very
you.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.